I thought I knew what betrayal felt like after my divorce 25 years ago, but nothing prepared me for watching my own son plot against me. Standing in my newly purchased $3 million lakefront villa, I watched through floor-to-ceiling windows as Marcus pulled into the circular driveway with his wife Stephanie and their twin toddlers. My phone buzzed with a text from my private investigator. Evidence confirmed. Financial records attached. As Marcus bounded up the marble steps calling, "Mom, this place is incredible. Stephanie will love decorating the nursery wing for the twins." I smiled coldly, speed dialing my attorney. Some lessons require the hardest possible classroom. "My name is Frankie, and at 67 years old, I thought I had earned the right to a peaceful retirement. For 3 decades, I worked night shifts as a factory supervisor in Grand Rapids, Michigan, watching over production lines while the rest of the world slept. The work was hard, the hours brutal, but it put food on our table and eventually paid for my son Marcus to attend the University of Michigan. I divorced Marcus's father when the boy was 12. His father was a charming man who could sweet-talk his way into any woman's heart, but he had the financial responsibility of a teenager. After catching him gambling away our house payment money for the 3rd time, I packed our bags and never looked back. From that day forward, it was just Marcus and me against the world. For 15 years, we lived in a modest 2-bedroom rental apartment on the east side of Grand Rapids. The carpet was beige and worn thin in places. The kitchen appliances were older than my marriage had been, and the bathroom faucet dripped no matter how many times I called maintenance. But it was clean, safe, and most importantly, it was ours. I made that little apartment into a home with secondhand furniture from garage sales, homemade curtains from fabric remnants, and enough love to fill a mansion. Every penny I earned went toward Marcus's future. While other single mothers struggled to make ends meet, I worked double shifts whenever possible. I skipped meals so Marcus could have new school clothes. I drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic held together with prayer and duct tape so he could participate in robotics club and soccer. When he got accepted to engineering school, I took out every loan I could qualify for and picked up a weekend job cleaning offices to cover what the loans wouldn't. Marcus graduated with honors and landed a job with a civil engineering firm in Grand Rapids. At 35, he was successful, respected, and making more money than I ever dreamed of earning. He married Stephanie 5 years ago, a beautiful blonde woman from a wealthy Connecticut family who had been his college sweetheart. They had twin toddlers, Jake and Emma, who were the light of my life. I thought I was living the American dream. My son was successful, happily married, and had given me 2 precious grandchildren. I continued working at the factory even after Marcus graduated, telling myself I enjoyed the routine and the camaraderie with my coworkers. The truth was, I had never learned how to live for myself. For so long, my entire identity had been wrapped up in being Marcus's mother that I didn't know who Frankie was supposed to be now that he didn't need me anymore. Stephanie came from money, real money. Her father, Richard, owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across New England, and her mother, Margaret, had never worked a day in her life. Their wedding cost more than I made in 2 years, held at some exclusive country club in Connecticut, with 300 guest ice sculptures and a 12-piece orchestra. I wore a dress from the clearance rack at Macy's and smiled until my cheeks hurt, pretending not to notice how Stephanie's relatives looked at me like I had wandered in from the wrong side of the tracks. From the beginning, Stephanie made little comments about my lifestyle. Nothing outright cruel, just subtle digs wrapped in fake concern. "Oh, Frankie, you're still working at your age. How exhausting that must be." Or, "Marcus tells me you've been in that little apartment for 15 years. Don't you ever want something bigger?" She had a way of making my choices sound pathetic while maintaining plausible deniability. I bit my tongue and smiled because I loved Marcus and wanted to be part of my grandchildren's lives. I babysat Jake and Emma every Tuesday and Thursday, while Stephanie went to yoga classes or lunch with her sorority sisters. I brought homemade meals when I knew Marcus was working late. When they needed help with unexpected expenses like car repairs or medical bills, I quietly slipped Marcus a check and told him not to mention it to his wife. Last Christmas, everything changed. Marcus and Stephanie hosted dinner at their beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in the suburbs. The house was everything I had dreamed of giving Marcus when he was growing up: hardwood floors, granite countertops, a 3-car garage, and a backyard big enough for the twins to run around safely. Stephanie had decorated it like something out of a magazine with color-coordinated everything, and not a single item out of place. During dinner, Stephanie's phone rang. It was her mother calling from Connecticut, and Stephanie put the call on speaker so Margaret could wish everyone a Merry Christmas. The conversation quickly turned to plans for the new year, and Margaret mentioned wanting to visit and meet some of Marcus's colleagues. "Oh, that would be wonderful," Stephanie gushed, her voice carrying that artificial sweetness she used when she wanted to impress people. "You'll love Marcus's work friends. They're all very successful, very accomplished people." "And what about Marcus's family?" Margaret asked. "I'd love to meet his mother properly this time." There was a pause, and I saw Stephanie glance toward the kitchen where I was quietly washing dishes. She lowered her voice, but the house had an open floor plan, and I could hear every word. "Well, that's a bit complicated," Stephanie said. "Marcus's mother still lives like she's 25, renting some tiny apartment. It's honestly embarrassing when our friends ask where grandmother lives. I mean, at her age, you'd think she'd have gotten her life together by now." I felt like I'd been slapped. My hands stilled in the soapy water, and I had to grip the edge of the sink to keep from dropping the plate I was holding. "Oh dear," Margaret replied. "That is unfortunate. Well, perhaps we can arrange to meet her somewhere neutral. A restaurant, perhaps." "Exactly what I was thinking," Stephanie agreed. "She'll probably die in that pathetic little place anyway. At least we won't have to worry about inheriting her problems." They laughed together, a sound that cut through me like broken glass. I finished the dishes in silence, kissed my grandchildren goodbye, and left without saying another word to Stephanie. Marcus walked me to my car, but he seemed distracted and didn't notice that I was shaking. That night I sat in my little rental apartment surrounded by the furniture and memories of a lifetime, and finally admitted something I had been hiding even from myself. I wasn't poor because I had to be. I was poor because I had chosen to be. 3 months later, during one of my regular babysitting days, Stephanie returned early from her shopping trip to find me reading bedtime stories to Jake and Emma in their playroom. The twins were cuddled against me on their little couch, and I was doing different voices for all the characters in their favorite book about a brave little mouse. "This is exactly what I'm talking about." Stephanie exploded, startling the children and making Emma start to cry. "Look at you in those discount store clothes sitting on our expensive furniture like you belong here. You don't fit in a house like this, Frankie." I stood up carefully, smoothing Emma's hair and whispering that everything was okay. "I'm sorry if I've done something wrong," I said quietly. "Face reality, Frankie." Stephanie continued, her voice growing louder and more vicious. "You'll die poor and alone in that rental, and Marcus and I will have to clean up your mess. It's time you started acting your age and stopped pretending you're part of this family's success." That's when Marcus walked in. He had been in his home office working on project plans and heard Stephanie's raised voice. But instead of asking what was wrong or defending me, he looked embarrassed. Embarrassed by me. "Stephanie's right, Mom," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Maybe it's time you thought about a retirement community, something more appropriate for someone in your situation." I collected my purse, kissed Jake and Emma goodbye, and walked out of that house with my head held high. But inside my heart was breaking. Not because of what Stephanie had said, but because my son, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, had stood there and agreed with her. That night, I made a phone call I hadn't made in 15 years. I called Harrison Blackwell at Blackwell & Associates investment firm, the company that had managed my father's estate since his death 30 years ago. "Frankie," Harrison said, his voice warm with surprise. "I was wondering when I'd finally hear from you." Harrison Blackwell's office occupied the top floor of the tallest building in downtown Grand Rapids, with windows overlooking the Grand River and the city I had called home for most of my life. I had never been in a building this fancy before, with marble floors, original artwork, and receptionists who looked like they belonged in fashion magazines. Harrison himself was a distinguished man in his 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had been my father's financial advisor for decades, and I remembered meeting him briefly at the funeral 30 years ago. Back then, I was 27 years old, recently divorced, and drowning in grief and responsibility. "Your father was a remarkable man." Harrison began settling into his leather chair across from me. "He started with nothing, built a successful manufacturing business, and invested wisely for decades. But more than that, he was determined that his daughter would never struggle the way he had as a young man." I twisted my hands in my lap, feeling underdressed in my department store pants and cardigan. "I don't understand. My father left me some money, but I used most of it for Marcus's education and living expenses years ago." Harrison smiled. "No, Frankie. What you accessed was a small allowance account he set up for immediate needs. The real inheritance was placed in a trust that couldn't be touched until you turned 67, or faced a family emergency that required significant resources." He opened a thick folder and spread documents across his desk. "Your father never wanted you to struggle, but he also wanted you to understand the value of hard work and independence. He made me promise not to contact you about this until you reached out first, or until your 67th birthday, whichever came first." My heart started racing as I looked at the numbers on the financial statements. "This can't be right." $4.2 million, Harrison confirmed. "Your father's original investment of $800,000, carefully managed and reinvested over 3 decades. He would be proud to know that you raised your son to be successful through your own efforts, never relying on money you didn't earn." I felt dizzy. For 40 years, I had counted every penny worked jobs that left me exhausted and aching, and lived in apartments where the heat didn't always work properly, all while sitting on a fortune that could have changed everything. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. "Because your father specifically requested that I didn't," Harrison replied gently. "He grew up during the Depression, Frankie. He believed that money without appreciation for its value was dangerous. He wanted you to build character first, wealth second." The meeting lasted 2 hours. Harrison explained how the money had been invested, introduced me to his assistant, who would help me access the funds, and recommended a team of professionals, including a tax attorney, a real estate agent, and a financial planner who specialized in helping people manage sudden wealth. "What do you want to do first?" Harrison asked as we wrapped up. I thought about Stephanie's cruel words about Marcus's embarrassment, about 40 years of making myself smaller so other people would feel more comfortable. "I want to buy a house," I said. "A really beautiful house." The next day, I met with Patricia Caldwell, the luxury real estate agent Harrison had recommended. Patricia was a polished woman in her 50s who specialized in high-end properties around Grand Rapids. She picked me up in a gleaming silver Mercedes and spent the morning driving me through neighborhoods I had only seen from the outside. We looked at penthouse condos downtown with city views and modern amenities. We toured sprawling suburban mansions with professional landscaping and three-car garages. We visited historic homes with original hardwood floors and enough character to fill a history book. But nothing felt right until we drove through the gates of Cascade Township and stopped in front of Willowbrook Estate. The house took my breath away. It was a contemporary masterpiece, 3 stories of glass and stone, nestled on 5 acres of lakefront property. The front entrance featured a circular driveway with fountains and mature oak trees that must have been there for decades. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see straight through the house to the private dock and the lake beyond. The current owners are relocating to Florida, Patricia explained as we walked through the grand foyer. They've spent the last 5 years renovating everything. New kitchen, updated electrical and plumbing, smart home technology throughout. It's truly move-in ready. The main floor flowed seamlessly from room to room. The gourmet kitchen featured commercial-grade appliances, granite countertops, and a center island big enough to prep meals for a small army. The living room boasted a stone fireplace that stretched from floor to ceiling, built-in bookshelves, and French doors leading to a covered patio overlooking the lake. Upstairs, the master suite was larger than my entire apartment. It included a sitting area with its own fireplace, walk-in closets that could double as small bedrooms, and a spa bathroom with a soaking tub positioned to take advantage of the water views. The lower level has been finished as an entertainment space. Patricia continued leading me downstairs to a home theater with leather recliners, a wet bar, and a wine cellar that could hold over 200 bottles. But what sold me was the smallest room in the house. Tucked away on the second floor was a cozy study with built-in bookshelves, a reading nook by the window, and enough space for a writing desk. It reminded me of the library I used to take Marcus to when he was little, where we would spend Saturday afternoons reading together. "How much?" I asked, though I was almost afraid to hear the answer. $2.9 million, Patricia replied. The owners are motivated to sell quickly, so there might be room for negotiation. I thought about my apartment with its dripping faucet and worn carpet. I thought about Stephanie's cruel words and Marcus's embarrassment. I thought about my father working 16-hour days so his daughter could have opportunities he never had. "I'll take it," I said. "Full price cash offer." Patricia's eyes widened. "Are you certain? Don't you want to think about it? Maybe bring your family to see it?" "I'm certain," I said firmly, "and no, my family doesn't need to see it. This house is for me." While we were touring the house 40 miles away in Marcus and Stephanie's suburban home, my daughter-in-law was hosting a dinner party for her old sorority sisters. I didn't know about this gathering, of course. I only learned about it later when one of the guests told me what happened. Stephanie had prepared an elaborate meal and set her dining room table with her best china and crystal. The conversation flowed as easily as the expensive wine covering topics like children's activities, vacation plans, and home renovations. But as the evening progressed, Stephanie seemed determined to steer the conversation toward her favorite subject, complaining about me. "You can't imagine how embarrassing it is," Stephanie told her guests, her voice taking on that martyred tone she used when she wanted sympathy. "Marcus is doing so well professionally, and we've worked hard to build a certain lifestyle. But then people meet his mother and she's living in what's basically government housing." Lauren, one of Stephanie's former sorority sisters, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "I'm sure she's a lovely woman," she said diplomatically. "Oh, she's nice enough." Stephanie waved her hand dismissively. "But she has no sense of propriety. She shows up to family gatherings dressed like she's going to clean someone's house, and she insists on bringing these awful casseroles and dishes from the dollar store. It reflects poorly on Marcus, and honestly, it's not fair to the children." Another guest, Jennifer, raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Well, they're going to be embarrassed by her eventually," Stephanie explained. When they get older and start having friends over, how do we explain that their grandmother lives in a studio apartment and drives a car that should have been scrapped years ago? Marcus had been in and out of the dining room serving drinks and clearing plates, but he mostly stayed quiet during these conversations. Later, Lauren told me that he looked uncomfortable but didn't contradict anything his wife said. "Have you talked to her about maybe upgrading her living situation?" Jennifer asked. "Perhaps she just needs some guidance." Stephanie laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Guidance requires money, and Marcus's mother has never been good with finances. She'll probably work until she literally can't anymore, and then we'll have to figure out what to do with her." "That's a harsh way to put it," Lauren said quietly. "It's realistic," Stephanie replied. "Marcus feels guilty because he thinks he should support her, but I keep telling him that's not our responsibility. She made her choices, and now she has to live with them." What Stephanie didn't know was that while she was hosting her dinner party and complaining about my financial situation, I was signing papers to purchase a $3 million house with cash. The closing process moved quickly. Within 10 days, I had transferred funds, completed inspections, and taken possession of Willowbrook Estate. The sellers had left most of the furniture since they were downsizing for their Florida retirement, so the house came fully furnished with pieces that cost more than I used to make in a year. I spent my first night in the master bedroom lying in bed, listening to the sound of water lapping against the dock outside my window. For the first time in decades, I felt like I could breathe freely. This was my house bought with my money, and nobody could take it away from me or make me feel ashamed for living in it. But I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I called Marcus. "Hi, Mom," he answered, sounding slightly hurried. "What's up?" "I was wondering if you and the family would like to come over for Sunday dinner this weekend," I said casually. "Come over where?" he asked, confused. "Your apartment is barely big enough for the four of us." "Oh, I've moved," I said, as if relocating to a lakefront mansion was the most natural thing in the world. "I'll text you the address. Let's say 2 o'clock. There was silence on the other end of the line. "Mom, are you okay? You're acting strange." "I'm perfectly fine, sweetheart. Better than I've been in years, actually. So I'll see you Sunday?" "I guess so," Marcus said slowly. "Should we bring anything?" "Just yourselves," I replied, smiling at my reflection in the bathroom mirror that was larger than my old kitchen. "Oh, and Marcus, you might want to leave some extra time to find the place. It's a bit bigger than what you're used to." Sunday morning dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight streaming across the lake and painting the trees in brilliant shades of gold and orange. I had spent the previous day preparing for Marcus and his family's visit, though preparing was probably too modest a word for what actually happened. I started by hiring Chef Roberto Martinez, who came highly recommended by Patricia Caldwell. Roberto arrived at 8 in the morning with assistants and enough ingredients to prepare a feast that could have fed 20 people. While they worked in the gourmet kitchen, I arranged for fresh flower deliveries throughout the house, white orchids in the foyer, autumn mums on the dining room table, and cheerful sunflowers in the playroom I had hastily set up for Jake and Emma. Thomas, the house manager who came with the property, ensured every surface gleamed and every detail was perfect. He was a kind man in his 60s who had worked for the previous owners and agreed to stay on to help me adjust to my new lifestyle. Thomas had arranged for the pool to be cleaned, the driveway to be swept, and the outdoor furniture to be positioned for maximum impact. But the biggest change was in me. I had spent Saturday afternoon shopping with Amanda, a personal stylist Harrison had recommended. Gone were my discount store cardigans and comfortable but shabby pants. Instead, I wore an elegant navy blue suit that fit me perfectly, paired with a pearl necklace that had belonged to my grandmother and low-heeled pumps that made me feel 3 inches taller. Amanda had also arranged for a hair appointment at Grand Rapids' most exclusive salon. My gray hair, which I had been cutting myself for years, was now professionally styled in a sophisticated bob that framed my face beautifully. A subtle makeup application completed the transformation, highlighting my eyes and giving me a confidence I hadn't felt since I was young. At 1:30, I positioned myself in the grand foyer, watching through the side lights for Marcus's familiar blue BMW. The circular driveway curved gracefully through landscaped gardens past the fountain and up to the front entrance of Willowbrook Estate. I had practiced this moment in my head dozens of times, but I still felt nervous butterflies dancing in my stomach. When Marcus's car finally appeared around the curve, I watched him slow down, then stop completely. Through the windshield, I could see him checking his GPS, looking at the house number, and checking his GPS again. Stephanie was gesturing wildly in the passenger seat, clearly confused about where they were. Jake and Emma had their faces pressed against the back windows, pointing excitedly at the fountains and the gardens. At 3 years old, they didn't question why Grandma Frankie had invited them to such a beautiful place. They just saw adventure and beauty the way children do. Marcus pulled into the circular drive and parked near the front entrance. I watched him get out slowly, still looking around in bewilderment. Stephanie emerged from the passenger side, smoothing her designer dress and checking her appearance in the car window. She was clearly trying to figure out if they were at the right address or if I had somehow made a mistake. "Mama, look at the pretty house," Emma called out as Marcus lifted her from her car seat. "Where's Grandma Frankie?" Jake asked, scanning the impressive facade as if expecting me to emerge from behind one of the oak trees. I waited until they were all standing together on the front walkway before opening the massive oak door. The transformation in their faces was everything I had hoped for and more. Marcus's mouth actually fell open. Stephanie went pale, then flushed red, then pale again. The twins broke free from their parents and ran toward me with delighted squeals. "Grandma Frankie! Grandma Frankie! Is this your new house?" Emma shouted, throwing her arms around my legs. "Welcome to my home," I said, simply scooping both children into a hug and meeting Marcus's stunned gaze over their heads. "Mom," Marcus said slowly, "what is this place? Are you house-sitting for someone?" Stephanie was still standing frozen by the car, staring at me like I had suddenly sprouted wings. "Did she rob a bank?" I heard her whisper to herself. "Come in," I said warmly, leading them through the foyer with its soaring ceiling and crystal chandelier. "Let me show you around." The house tour that followed was better than any revenge fantasy I could have imagined. I led them through room after room, watching their faces as they took in the marble floors, the custom millwork, the breathtaking lake views, and the obvious expense of everything around them. In the gourmet kitchen, Roberto was putting the finishing touches on a meal that belonged in a 5-star restaurant. The dining room table was set with bone china and crystal that sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. The living room's stone fireplace crackled warmly, casting dancing shadows on the Persian rugs and original artwork that decorated the space. Jake and Emma were enchanted by everything, but especially by the playroom I had created for them. It was filled with educational toys, books, art supplies, and a child-sized table perfect for coloring projects. French doors led from the playroom to a covered patio where I had installed a playset with swings and a slide. "Grandma, can we live here?" Jake asked innocently, running his hands along the smooth surface of his new coloring table. "This is just for visiting sweetheart," I replied, ruffling his hair. The master suite left Stephanie speechless. She walked through the sitting area, the enormous walk-in closets, and the spa bathroom without saying a word. I watched her mentally calculating the cost of everything she saw, her expression growing more confused and angry by the minute. The lower-level entertainment area was the final stop on our tour. The home theater with its leather recliners and surround sound system impressed Marcus, who had always loved movies. The wine cellar stocked with bottles I was still learning to pronounce made Stephanie's eyes widen with something that looked like hunger. "Mom," Marcus said when we were back in the main living area, "I don't understand. How can you afford all this?" Before I could answer, Stephanie found her voice. It came out as a strangled whisper that gradually grew louder. "This is perfect," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Absolutely perfect. The kids will love growing up here. Jake and Emma can have their own wing, and there's plenty of space for when we have more children." Marcus nodded enthusiastically, apparently forgetting that this was supposed to be my house. "The location is incredible, Mom. Emma would love that playroom, and Jake could learn to swim in the pool. We could host Christmas here, and Stephanie's parents could finally visit and see that our family is doing well." I listened to them plan their future in my home, dividing up rooms and making renovation suggestions, and I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. They weren't asking if they could move in. They weren't even acknowledging that this might be my space. They were simply assuming that whatever good fortune had come my way was automatically theirs to share. "You know what?" I said sweetly. "Let me just make a quick phone call before we eat. Roberto has prepared such a lovely meal, and I want to make sure we can enjoy it without any interruptions." I stepped into the study, closed the door behind me, and pulled out my phone. Through the window, I could see Marcus and Stephanie on the patio, still deep in conversation about which rooms would become which children's bedrooms and how they would rearrange the furniture to better suit their needs. The call I made was to David Steinberg, the estate attorney Harrison had recommended. I had been planning to contact him eventually to update my will and handle other legal matters related to my newfound wealth, but Stephanie and Marcus's presumption had moved up my timeline considerably. "David," I said when he answered, "this is Frankie Morrison. Harrison Blackwell referred me to you. I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. It's about protecting assets from family members who might not have my best interests at heart." When I rejoined my family in the living room, they were sitting together on the sofa, still talking animatedly about their plans for the house. Stephanie had her phone out and was showing Marcus pictures of nursery furniture she thought would look good in one of the spare bedrooms. "Everything settled?" Marcus asked absently, barely looking up from Stephanie's phone screen. "Oh yes," I replied, settling into my chair with a smile. "Everything is going exactly according to plan." Monday morning found me in David Steinberg's law office, a distinguished practice housed in a restored Victorian mansion that had been converted into professional suites. David was a sharp-minded attorney in his early 50s who specialized in estate planning and asset protection. Harrison Blackwell had recommended him specifically because of his experience helping wealthy clients protect themselves from family members who might view inheritance as an entitlement rather than a gift. "Tell me about your concerns," David said, settling behind his mahogany desk with a legal pad and pen. I explained what had happened during Sunday's dinner, how Marcus and Stephanie had immediately begun planning to move into my house without any invitation or discussion. I described their years of subtle and not so subtle disrespect, culminating in Stephanie's cruel words about me dying poor and alone. "They're not bad people," I concluded, "but they seem to think that any good fortune that comes my way automatically becomes their good fortune as well. I want to make sure that doesn't happen." David took detailed notes and asked probing questions about my relationship with Marcus, my financial situation, and my long-term plans. He was particularly interested when I mentioned Stephanie's family background and her tendency toward expensive tastes. "I'd like to recommend a private investigator," David said. "Rebecca Thompson specializes in financial background checks and family situations. If your daughter-in-law has hidden debts or financial problems, it's better to know about them now rather than discover them later when they might affect your assets." He also suggested updating my will immediately and establishing a revocable trust that would give me maximum control over my assets during my lifetime while protecting them from potential claims after my death. "What about adding Marcus to any accounts?" I asked. "He's been dropping hints about helping me manage my finances." David's expression grew serious. "Given what you've told me about his wife's assumptions and their immediate plans to move into your home, I would strongly advise against giving anyone access to your accounts right now. We can always add beneficiaries or trustees later, but it's much harder to remove someone once they have legal access to your money." While I was meeting with David 40 miles away, Marcus and Stephanie were having their own meeting. They had arranged to take a long lunch break so they could drive back to Willowbrook Estate and take another look at the house in daylight, without me there to supervise their exploration. What I learned later was that they had convinced themselves I was in some kind of financial trouble and needed their help to manage my new situation. Stephanie, in particular, seemed to believe that my sudden move to an expensive house was evidence of poor decision-making rather than increased resources. "She's clearly in over her head," Stephanie told Marcus as they stood in my driveway looking up at the house. "Think about it logically. Your mother has worked in a factory her whole life. There's no way she can afford the taxes and upkeep on a place like this." Marcus nodded reluctantly. He loved me, but he had been listening to Stephanie's opinions about my financial irresponsibility for years, and her arguments seemed logical to him. "Maybe someone took advantage of her," he suggested. "You know how elderly people can be targeted by unscrupulous real estate agents and financial advisors." Stephanie pulled up real estate listings on her phone and showed Marcus the estimated value of comparable properties in the area. "Look at these numbers, Marcus. Houses like this sell for $3 million or more. Your mother would need serious money to afford something like this, and where would she get that kind of cash?" They walked around the property, peering through windows and making notes about what they saw. Stephanie was particularly interested in the home theater and wine cellar, already planning how she would redecorate and entertain her friends in the space. "We need to be strategic about this," Stephanie said as they drove back to town. "Your mother is obviously going through some kind of crisis, making impulsive financial decisions that could ruin her. As her family, we have a responsibility to step in and help her before she loses everything." That evening, they invited me to dinner at their house. Stephanie cooked my favorite meal pot roast with vegetables and set the dining room table with her good china. The twins were unusually well-behaved, having been coached to be extra sweet to Grandma Frankie. After dinner, Marcus and Stephanie sat me down in their living room for what they called a family conversation. Stephanie had printed out articles about financial abuse targeting seniors, and Marcus had prepared talking points about the importance of family members looking out for each other. "Mom, we're concerned about you." Marcus began, his voice gentle but firm. "This house purchase seems very sudden and out of character. We're worried that someone might have taken advantage of you." Stephanie leaned forward with her most sympathetic expression. "Frankie, we know you've worked hard your whole life, but living in a place like that must be draining your savings account. The property taxes alone probably cost more than your rent used to be." I let them talk, nodding and asking innocent questions about their concerns. Inside, I was furious, but I had learned the value of gathering information before acting. They were treating me like a confused elderly woman who couldn't manage her own affairs, and they clearly had plans for how to help me fix my supposed mistakes. "What do you think I should do?" I asked, playing the role of the overwhelmed senior citizen they apparently thought I was. Marcus and Stephanie exchanged a meaningful look. "Well," Marcus said carefully, "maybe I should be added to your bank accounts just in case you need help managing bills or dealing with financial matters. And Stephanie has some great ideas about how we could make the house more practical for someone your age." I was thinking we could convert the lower level into a nice apartment for you, Stephanie added enthusiastically. You could have your own private space, but we'd be right upstairs to help if you needed anything. The twins would love having you so close, and Marcus and I could handle all the complicated stuff like maintenance and taxes. I nodded thoughtfully as if this sounded like a reasonable solution to a problem I didn't actually have. That's very generous of you both, I said. Let me think about it. What they didn't know was that while they were planning to rescue me from my financial incompetence, I was planning something entirely different. The next morning, I called Rebecca Thompson, the private investigator David had recommended. Rebecca was a former police detective who now specialized in financial investigations and background checks. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who got straight to the point. I need a complete financial background check on my daughter-in-law, I told her. I want to know about any debts, hidden accounts, spending patterns, employment history, and anything else that might be relevant to her current financial situation. Any particular reason for concern? Rebecca asked. She's very interested in helping me manage my money, I replied dryly. I'd like to know why. Rebecca's preliminary report came back within 48 hours, and what she found was disturbing. Stephanie had accumulated over $43,000 in credit card debt across 7 different cards. She had a serious gambling problem, primarily online poker and sports betting that Marcus apparently knew nothing about. Most troubling of all, her previous employer, a nonprofit organization in Connecticut, had terminated her employment due to irregularities in their petty cash fund. The detailed financial records showed a pattern of expensive purchases, followed by frantic attempts to pay minimum balances, then taking cash advances from one card to pay another. Stephanie was essentially running a one-woman Ponzi scheme with credit cards, and it was only a matter of time before the whole thing collapsed. Armed with this information, I began to understand why Stephanie was so interested in my living situation and so eager to help me manage my finances. She wasn't concerned about my well-being. She was looking for a solution to her own financial problems. But I wasn't ready to confront them yet. Instead, I decided to give them more rope and see how much they were willing to take. Over the next few weeks, I continued to play the role of the confused elderly woman who was overwhelmed by her new circumstances. I called Marcus regularly with questions about managing the house, and I let slip comments about how expensive everything was. I mentioned having trouble understanding the property tax bills and feeling confused about the home insurance policy. I even suggested that maybe Stephanie was right about the house being too much for me to handle. Marcus and Stephanie responded exactly as I had expected. They became more aggressive in their offers to help and more specific about their plans for how we could all live together in my house. Stephanie started shopping for furniture online and showing me pictures of how she thought we could improve the living spaces. Marcus began researching property management companies and suggesting that he could take over the financial responsibilities. During one particularly revealing conversation, Stephanie suggested that we should have a family meeting with a lawyer to discuss protecting my assets. She had found an attorney who specialized in elder care, and she thought it would be wise to establish some kind of legal framework for how the family could help me manage my affairs. Just in case something happens to you, she explained sweetly. We want to make sure everything is handled properly and that the twins' inheritance is protected. It was interesting how quickly my house had become the twins' inheritance in her mind, especially since Marcus was my only child, and I had never discussed any inheritance plans with either of them. The attorney Stephanie had found was Dr. Patricia Wells, a woman who had a reputation for helping families establish conservatorships for elderly relatives. The more I researched Dr. Wells, the more concerned I became about her methods and her willingness to declare people incompetent based on very little evidence. That's when I realized what Stephanie and Marcus were really planning. They weren't just trying to help me manage my money. They were laying the groundwork to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could take control of my assets legally. The final piece of evidence came when I accidentally overheard a phone conversation between Stephanie and her mother. I had arrived early for babysitting and let myself in with the key they had given me. Stephanie was in the kitchen talking loudly on her cell phone while the twins played in the living room. "The old lady clearly struck oil somewhere," Stephanie was saying. "Marcus thinks she might be showing early signs of dementia, which actually works perfectly for our situation. Once we get power of attorney, this whole mess becomes manageable." I stood frozen in the hallway listening to my daughter-in-law plot against me while my grandchildren played innocently just a few feet away. "I've already contacted Dr. Wells about getting a competency evaluation," Stephanie continued. "We just need to document her confusion and poor decision-making, which shouldn't be hard given that house purchase. Marcus is finally starting to see that his mother needs professional help." She laughed, a sound that made my blood run cold. "I've already picked out the assisted living facility. It's nice enough, but the best part is that it frees up the house for us. Jake and Emma will have their own rooms, and I'll finally have space to entertain properly." I backed quietly out of the house and sat in my car for 20 minutes, trying to process what I had just heard. My own son, the child I had sacrificed everything for, was planning to have me committed so his wife could steal my home. That night, I called Rebecca Thompson and asked her to expand her investigation. I wanted to know everything about Stephanie's financial situation, her gambling habits, and her history with her previous employer. I also asked her to look into Dr. Patricia Wells and her track record with competency evaluations. But most importantly, I asked Rebecca to install discreet recording equipment throughout my house. If Stephanie and Marcus were planning to use my own words against me in a competency hearing, I wanted to make sure I had their words recorded as well. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for them to walk into it. Rebecca Thompson's full investigation report arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered to David Steinberg's office in a sealed envelope marked "Confidential." What she had uncovered was worse than I had imagined, painting a picture of systematic deception and financial desperation that explained everything about Stephanie's sudden interest in my welfare. The gambling problem was extensive and well documented. Stephanie had active accounts with dozens of online poker sites and sports betting platforms. Her losses over the past 2 years totaled nearly $60,000, money that had come from credit cards, personal loans, and apparently theft from her previous employer. The embezzlement from the Connecticut nonprofit where she had worked was particularly damning. Stephanie had been the office manager for a children's charity responsible for managing donations and organizing fundraising events. Over the course of 18 months, she had systematically stolen small amounts from petty cash donor gifts and event proceeds. The theft was discovered during a routine audit, but the charity had chosen not to press criminal charges in exchange for her immediate resignation and repayment of the stolen funds. What shocked me most was learning that Marcus had been covering some of her debts without fully understanding their scope. He had paid off one of her credit cards the previous year, believing it was a one-time problem related to unexpected medical expenses. He had also co-signed for a personal loan that Stephanie claimed was for home improvements, though the money had actually gone to pay gambling debts. "Your son is in a vulnerable position," David explained as we reviewed the documents. "If Stephanie's creditors come after marital assets, or if her gambling debts become unmanageable, Marcus could lose his house, his savings, and his credit rating." Armed with this information, I authorized Rebecca to install professional-grade recording equipment throughout Willowbrook Estate. The system was sophisticated and completely undetectable, with tiny cameras in common areas and audio recording devices in every room. Thomas, my house manager, helped coordinate the installation team and showed me how to operate everything from an app on my smartphone. "Are you certain about this, Mrs. Morrison?" Thomas asked as we tested the system. "This seems like a very serious situation." "I hope I'm wrong, Thomas," I replied, watching the crystal-clear video feed from my living room camera. "But if I'm right, I need evidence that will hold up in court." The opportunity to test my new surveillance system came sooner than expected. Marcus called that Friday afternoon to ask if they could come over for dinner the following evening. Stephanie wanted to bring her friend Kelly Morrison, who was visiting from Connecticut, and they thought it would be nice to show her my beautiful new house. What Marcus didn't mention, and what I learned later from the recordings, was that Kelly Morrison wasn't just a friend. She was an attorney who specialized in elder law and had experience helping families establish conservatorships for aging relatives. Stephanie had specifically invited her to evaluate my mental state and provide professional advice about the next steps in their plan. Saturday evening arrived with unseasonably warm weather for late October. I prepared for their visit by dressing in the most expensive outfit I owned and having Roberto prepare an elaborate meal that would showcase both the house and my apparent financial resources. If they were planning to use my own success against me, I wanted to make sure they had plenty of material to work with. Kelly Morrison turned out to be a polished woman in her 40s, impeccably dressed and radiating the kind of confidence that comes from years of legal practice. She complimented the house extensively and asked detailed questions about my adjustment to the new living situation. "It must be quite a change from your previous home," Kelly said over cocktails in the living room. "How are you managing all the new responsibilities that come with a property like this?" I could see her taking mental notes as I responded, evaluating my coherence and looking for signs of confusion or poor judgment. I decided to give her exactly what she was looking for. "Oh, it's been overwhelming," I admitted, allowing my voice to quaver slightly. "The bills are so confusing, and there are so many people calling about maintenance and taxes and insurance. I don't understand half of what they're telling me." Stephanie and Kelly exchanged a meaningful look. "That's exactly what we've been worried about," Stephanie said, her voice dripping with false concern. "A house like this requires professional management. It's nothing to be ashamed of, Frankie. Many people in their golden years find it difficult to handle complex financial arrangements." Kelly nodded sympathetically. "Have you considered establishing a power of attorney arrangement with a family member? Someone who could help you navigate these complicated decisions while still allowing you to maintain your independence?" "Marcus has mentioned something like that," I said, wringing my hands in what I hoped looked like genuine anxiety. "But I don't want to be a burden on anyone." "You wouldn't be a burden at all," Marcus assured me, playing his role perfectly. "Stephanie and I love you, Mom. We want to help you enjoy this beautiful house without all the stress of managing everything yourself." The conversation continued in this vein throughout dinner, with Kelly asking leading questions designed to highlight my apparent inability to handle my own affairs, and Marcus and Stephanie offering increasingly specific solutions to problems I didn't actually have. After dinner, while I was supposedly in the kitchen checking on dessert, they gathered in the living room for what they thought was a private conversation. Thanks to my recording equipment, I heard every word from my phone in the kitchen. "She's clearly overwhelmed," Kelly said in a low voice. "The house purchase alone demonstrates questionable judgment, but her inability to understand basic financial concepts is more concerning." "How long has she been showing these signs?" "It's gotten worse over the past few months," Stephanie replied. She used to be more independent, but since she moved here, she's been calling Marcus constantly with questions about things she should be able to handle herself. Marcus sounded uncomfortable but didn't contradict his wife's assessment. I just want to make sure she's safe and well cared for, he said. If that means taking over some of the financial responsibilities, I'm willing to do that. Kelly's voice took on a professional tone. The good news is that she seems receptive to getting help. The key is to move quickly before her condition deteriorates further. I can recommend a geriatric psychiatrist who specializes in competency evaluations. Once we have a professional assessment documenting her incapacity, we can file for conservatorship through the probate court. How long would that take? Stephanie asked eagerly. If everything goes smoothly, we could have temporary conservatorship established within 60 days, Kelly replied. Marcus would become her legal guardian with authority to make financial and medical decisions on her behalf. And the house? Stephanie pressed. Would be protected as part of her estate managed by the conservator for her benefit, Kelly explained. Of course, the conservator would need to make practical decisions about her living arrangements, especially if her current situation becomes unsustainable. I listened to them planning my future while I stood in my own kitchen surrounded by the beautiful home I had bought with my own money and the life I had built through decades of hard work and sacrifice. The betrayal was complete now, and it was time to start building my defense. Over the next 2 weeks, I played my role perfectly. I allowed them to accompany me to the bank where I pretended to be confused by account statements and grateful for their help understanding my finances. I asked Marcus to explain property tax bills and insurance policies, acting overwhelmed by concepts I understood perfectly well. Meanwhile, Rebecca Thompson continued her investigation and made several disturbing discoveries. Dr. Patricia Wells, the psychiatrist Kelly had recommended, had a troubling track record of rubber stamping competency evaluations for families seeking conservatorship. Several of her previous cases had been overturned on appeal, and there were ongoing investigations into her practices by the state medical board. More importantly, Stephanie's financial situation was deteriorating rapidly. She had maxed out 2 more credit cards and taken a cash advance against Marcus's home equity line of credit without his knowledge. Her gambling losses had accelerated, and she was showing classic signs of addiction escalation. She's getting desperate, Rebecca warned during one of our meetings. Desperate people make reckless decisions. You need to be prepared for the possibility that they'll try to move quickly. Rebecca was right. The following Friday, Marcus called to invite me to a family meeting at their house on Sunday afternoon. When I asked what the meeting was about, he was vague, saying only that they wanted to discuss some important family matters and that they had invited a professional to help facilitate the conversation. I knew exactly what kind of professional they had invited, and I knew this was likely to be their attempt to create evidence of my incompetence for their conservatorship filing. But I also knew something they didn't know. Every conversation they had been having in my house for the past month had been recorded, and I had enough evidence to destroy their plan completely. Saturday night, I called David Steinberg at home. It's time, I told him. Tomorrow they're going to try to have me declared incompetent. Are you ready? More than ready, David replied. Are you certain you want to go through with this? Once we reveal what we know, there's no going back? I thought about my father working 16-hour days so his daughter could have opportunities he never had. I thought about 40 years of being underestimated and overlooked, of making myself smaller so other people would feel more comfortable. I thought about Stephanie's cruel words and Marcus's silent complicity. I'm certain, I said. It's time for some people to learn that underestimating Frankie Morrison is a very expensive mistake. Sunday arrived with gray skies and a cold wind that stripped the last leaves from the oak trees around Willowbrook Estate. I dressed carefully for what I knew would be the most important performance of my life, choosing a simple but elegant dress and the pearl necklace that had belonged to my grandmother. I wanted to look like exactly what I was, a competent, intelligent woman who was fully capable of managing her own affairs. The family meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock at Marcus and Stephanie's house, but I had my own plans for how the afternoon would unfold. At 11:30, I called Marcus to suggest that we move the meeting to my house instead. "I've been thinking about our conversation," I told him, "and I realize there are some important documents here that we might need to review. Would it be easier to meet at Willowbrook Estate instead?" Marcus was surprised but agreeable. "Are you sure, Mom? We don't want to put you to any trouble." "No trouble at all," I assured him. "In fact, I'd like to invite a few other people to join us. I think it would be helpful to have some additional perspectives on these important family decisions." What Marcus didn't know was that my guest list included David Steinberg, Rebecca Thompson, and Detective James Rodriguez from the Grand Rapids Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. I had also arranged for Thomas to prepare light refreshments for what was going to be a very memorable gathering. At 1:45, I positioned myself in the living room and activated the recording system from my smartphone. Every word and gesture from this point forward would be captured in high-definition video and crystal-clear audio. Marcus and Stephanie arrived promptly at 2 o'clock, accompanied by Dr. Patricia Wells. The doctor was exactly what I had expected, a severe-looking woman in her 60s who carried herself with the arrogance of someone accustomed to having her professional opinions accepted without question. "Mrs. Morrison," Dr. Wells said, extending a hand that felt cold and limp when I shook it. "Your son and daughter-in-law have expressed some concerns about your well-being. I'm here to help us all have a productive conversation about how we can best support you during this transition period." Jake and Emma had been left with a babysitter, which told me that this meeting was expected to involve discussions that weren't appropriate for children. That was probably wise given what I had planned. "Before we begin," I said sweetly, "I've taken the liberty of inviting a few other people to join us. I hope you don't mind." Stephanie's face went pale. "Other people who else could possibly need to be involved in a private family matter?" "Oh, just some professional advisors," I replied casually. "I thought it would be helpful to have expert opinions on these important decisions." The doorbell rang and Thomas admitted David Steinberg, Rebecca Thompson, and Detective Rodriguez. The change in atmosphere was immediate and electric. Stephanie looked like she was going to be sick, and Marcus stood up so quickly he knocked over his water glass. "What's going on, Mom?" Marcus demanded, his voice tight with anxiety. "Please, everyone sit down," I said, taking my place in the chair that gave me the best view of all my guests. "I believe we have some very important things to discuss." Dr. Wells looked uncomfortable but maintained her professional composure. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm not sure this is the appropriate setting for the kind of conversation your family requested. Perhaps we should reschedule for a more private environment." "On the contrary," David interjected smoothly, "I think this is exactly the right setting. My client has some very serious concerns about the motivations behind this meeting, and she's asked me to ensure that everyone's interests are properly represented." Detective Rodriguez introduced himself and explained that he was present in connection with an ongoing financial fraud investigation. The color drained completely from Stephanie's face, and she grabbed Marcus's arm so tightly that he winced. "Now then," I said, pulling out a folder of documents that Rebecca had prepared, "let's start with the real reason we're all here today. Dr. Wells, my understanding is that you're here to evaluate my mental competency in preparation for a conservatorship filing. Is that correct?" Dr. Wells glanced nervously at Stephanie before answering. "Your family has expressed concerns about your ability to manage complex financial decisions. They've asked me to provide a professional assessment of your current cognitive functioning. I see, I replied. And Stephanie, is it true that you and Marcus have been planning to file for conservatorship so that you can gain control of my assets and move into this house? Stephanie started to protest, but I held up my hand. Please don't answer yet. I think it would be better if we listened to your own words on this subject. I pulled out my smartphone and connected it to the sound system Thomas had set up in the living room. With a touch of the screen, Stephanie's voice filled the room crystal clear and unmistakably incriminating. The old lady clearly struck oil somewhere. Marcus thinks she might be showing early signs of dementia, which actually works perfectly for our situation. Once we get power of attorney, this whole mess becomes manageable. The room went completely silent except for the sound of Stephanie's recorded voice, continuing to explain her plans for having me committed and taking over my house. Marcus looked stunned, as if he was hearing these words for the first time. I've already contacted Dr. Wells about getting a competency evaluation. We just need to document her confusion and poor decision-making, which shouldn't be hard given that house purchase. When the recording ended, Dr. Wells was the first to speak. I had no idea, she said quickly. Mrs. Morrison, I was told this was a legitimate family concern about your welfare. I would never participate in a fraudulent conservatorship proceeding. Of course not, I said dryly. I'm sure your track record of rubber-stamping questionable competency evaluations is just a series of unfortunate coincidences. Detective Rodriguez leaned forward. Mrs. Garrett, he said, addressing Stephanie by her legal name, we've been investigating reports of financial fraud and elder abuse. These recordings, combined with other evidence we've gathered, suggest that you and your husband have been engaged in a conspiracy to defraud Mrs. Morrison of her assets. This is insane, Stephanie burst out. We were trying to help her. She's clearly not capable of managing a house like this on her own. Really? Rebecca interjected, opening her briefcase and pulling out a thick folder. Let's talk about who's actually having trouble managing their finances. Stephanie, would you like to explain to your husband why you've accumulated $43,000 in credit card debt that he doesn't know about? Marcus turned to stare at his wife. What is she talking about? Rebecca continued relentlessly. Or perhaps you'd like to discuss your gambling addiction, or the money you stole from your previous employer, or the cash advance you took against Marcus's home equity line of credit without his knowledge. The revelations came one after another, each piece of evidence more damning than the last. Stephanie's financial records were spread across the coffee table like a roadmap of deception and desperation. Marcus sat in stunned silence as he learned about the true scope of his wife's problems and the real reason behind her sudden interest in my living situation. You've been lying to me about everything, Marcus said quietly, his voice breaking. How much of our marriage has been built on lies? Stephanie tried to deflect blame, claiming she had only been trying to protect our family's future and secure the twins' inheritance. But the recordings made it clear that her primary motivation had been solving her own financial problems at my expense. Dr. Wells gathered her papers and stood to leave. I will not be participating in this proceeding, she announced. Mrs. Morrison, you clearly have full command of your faculties, and I apologize for any distress this situation has caused you. Detective Rodriguez was more direct. Mrs. Garrett, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder fraud, attempted theft, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. As the detective read Stephanie her rights, she turned to me with pure hatred in her eyes. You manipulative witch! She screamed. You planned this whole thing. You've been recording us and plotting against us from the beginning. I looked at her calmly and replied, I learned from watching you, dear. The difference is that I was protecting myself from people who wanted to hurt me, while you were trying to steal from someone who had only ever been kind to you. The twins who had been playing upstairs during the confrontation came down as the police were leading Stephanie away. Marcus tried to explain that Mommy had to go away for a while because she had made some very bad choices, but the children were confused and frightened by the chaos. As the police car pulled out of my driveway with Stephanie in the back seat, Marcus collapsed into one of my kitchen chairs and put his head in his hands. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I don't know how I let this happen. I should have protected you instead of going along with her plans." For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt a flicker of sympathy for my son. He had been manipulated too in his own way, though his willingness to believe the worst about me was something we would need to address in time. "Marcus," I said gently, "you have some very difficult decisions to make. Your wife is going to prison, and you're going to need to figure out how to protect your children and rebuild your life. I'll help you however I can, but things between us are going to be different from now on." He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "I know I don't deserve it, but can you ever forgive me?" "We'll see," I replied. "Forgiveness is earned, not given. But you're my son, and Jake and Emma are my grandchildren. We'll figure out how to move forward one step at a time." As the sun set over the lake that evening, I stood in my beautiful living room surrounded by the life I had built for myself, finally free from the people who had tried to take it away from me. The battle was won, but the real work of healing and rebuilding was just beginning. 6 months after Stephanie's arrest, I stood in the same courtroom where she had once hoped to have me declared incompetent watching as the judge sentenced her to 3 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of probation. The charges had included conspiracy to commit elder fraud, attempted theft of assets over $1 million, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Her gambling debts and previous embezzlement had been presented as evidence of a pattern of financial deception that made her subsequent actions against me seem inevitable rather than impulsive. The prosecutor had painted a picture of a woman so desperate to solve her own problems that she was willing to destroy her husband's relationship with his mother and traumatize her own children in the process. Marcus sat beside me during the sentencing, holding Jake's hand while Emma dozed in my lap. The twins were too young to fully understand what was happening, but they knew that Mommy had been gone for a long time and that Daddy was often sad. Marcus had filed for divorce 3 months after Stephanie's arrest, and the custody hearing had awarded him primary custody of the children due to their mother's criminal conviction. The financial consequences for Stephanie were as devastating as the legal ones. Her creditors had forced her into bankruptcy, and her parents had disowned her after learning the full scope of her deception. The Connecticut nonprofit where she had previously worked had also decided to pursue criminal charges for the embezzlement, which meant she would face additional legal troubles once she completed her sentence in Michigan. Marcus, meanwhile, had been struggling to rebuild his life as a single father. His savings had been depleted by legal fees and Stephanie's hidden debts, and he was working longer hours to cover the mortgage on a house that now felt too big and empty. The revelation of his wife's betrayal had shattered his confidence in his own judgment, and he was attending counseling to understand how he had missed so many warning signs. Our relationship was slowly healing, but it would never be the same as it was before. Marcus had apologized countless times for his role in Stephanie's plan, and I could see that his remorse was genuine. But trust once broken takes time and consistent action to rebuild. I loved my son, but I no longer saw him as the innocent victim of his wife's manipulation. He had made choices too, and some of those choices had been cruel. I had established clear boundaries about our new relationship. Marcus and the twins were welcome at Willowbrook Estate, but only for scheduled visits and family occasions. I would help with babysitting and emotional support during his transition to single parenthood, but I would not be taken for granted or treated as an unpaid nanny. Most importantly, my financial affairs remained private, and any discussion of inheritance or future financial planning was strictly off limits. Jake and Emma were adapting better than any of us had expected. Children are remarkably resilient, and they seemed to accept the new family dynamic without too much difficulty. They loved spending time at my house, especially swimming in the pool and playing in the elaborate playroom I had created for them. I made sure they understood that Mommy's absence was due to her own bad choices, not because of anything they had done. The house itself had become more than just a home to me. It had become a symbol of my independence and self-worth. I had commissioned local artists to create custom pieces for each room, and I had added a greenhouse where I grew orchids and vegetables. The wine cellar had been stocked with bottles I was slowly learning to appreciate, and the library had been filled with books I had always wanted to read but never had time for during my working years. But perhaps the most meaningful change I had made was establishing the Morrison Foundation for Single Mothers. The foundation operated out of a suite of offices I had created in the lower level of the house, and it provided financial assistance, job training, and temporary housing for women who were rebuilding their lives after divorce or domestic abuse. The foundation's first beneficiary was a young woman named Sarah Martinez, whose husband had abandoned her and their 2 young daughters after running up massive gambling debts. Sarah had been working 3 part-time jobs and living in her car when she contacted the foundation through a referral from a local women's shelter. I arranged for Sarah and her daughters to stay in the guest cottage on my property while she completed a nursing program at the local community college. Watching her transform from a desperate, exhausted woman into a confident healthcare professional reminded me of my own journey and gave me a sense of purpose I had never experienced during my factory years. The foundation had helped 12 families during its first year of operation, providing everything from emergency rent payments to full college scholarships. Each success story felt like a validation of the choices I had made and the boundaries I had established. The money my father had left me was being used to lift other women up rather than being stolen by people who felt entitled to it. My personal life had blossomed in ways I never expected. Through my philanthropic work, I had met other women who shared my passion for social justice and community service. Margaret Chen, a retired teacher who ran a literacy program, had become one of my closest friends. We traveled together to conferences and workshops, learning about best practices in nonprofit management and expanding our understanding of the issues facing vulnerable women. I had also reconnected with some of my former co-workers from the factory, many of whom were struggling with retirement planning and healthcare costs. The foundation had expanded to include a financial literacy program specifically designed for working-class women approaching retirement age. These workshops, held monthly in the community room of the local library, were some of my most rewarding work. On a personal level, I had discovered interests and talents I never knew I possessed. I was taking art classes at the community college, learning to paint watercolor landscapes that captured the changing seasons around the lake. I had joined a book club and a bridge group, finally having time to pursue the intellectual and social activities I had always postponed in favor of work and family responsibilities. The transformation wasn't just external, it was internal as well. For the first time in my adult life, I was living for myself rather than for other people's expectations or approval. I dressed well because it made me feel confident, not because I was trying to impress anyone. I decorated my house according to my own taste, not to accommodate other people's needs. I made plans and decisions based on my own interests and values rather than constantly deferring to what other people thought was best. Marcus was slowly learning to see me as a complete person rather than just as his mother or his children's grandmother. Our conversations had become more substantial and meaningful as he began to understand that I had thoughts and experiences that existed independently of our family relationship. He still struggled with guilt about his role in Stephanie's plan, but he was making genuine efforts to rebuild trust through consistency and respect. The twins were thriving under the new arrangement. Jake had developed a love of swimming and was taking lessons at the community center pool. Emma was fascinated by the greenhouse and helped me tend the orchids, learning about different varieties and their care requirements. Both children seemed more secure and confident now that the toxic atmosphere of their parents' marriage had been removed from their daily lives. As I reflected on the journey from my modest rental apartment to this beautiful lakefront estate, I realized that the most important change hadn't been in my living situation or financial status. The most important change had been in my understanding of my own worth and my willingness to protect it from people who didn't respect it. For 40 years, I had made myself smaller to accommodate other people's comfort and convenience. I had accepted disrespect and cruelty because I thought that was the price of maintaining family relationships. I had confused love with sacrifice and loyalty with allowing people to treat me poorly because I was afraid of being alone. But I had learned that being alone is not the same as being lonely, and that relationships built on exploitation and disrespect are more isolating than solitude. The family I had now, with Marcus working to earn back my trust, and the twins learning to see me as a complete person, was smaller than it had been before, but it was more honest and healthier. The foundation work had introduced me to dozens of women who had faced similar choices between self-respect and family harmony, and I had seen how liberating it could be to choose self-respect. Some of them had lost relationships in the process, but they had gained something more valuable: the knowledge that they deserved to be treated with dignity and kindness. Looking back, I could see that Stephanie had done me a favor by being so blatantly cruel and greedy. Her actions had forced me to confront patterns of behavior and relationship dynamics that I might have continued to tolerate indefinitely if they had been more subtle. Her betrayal had been a gift wrapped in pain, but a gift nonetheless. As I write this story, it's been 2 years since that terrible Sunday afternoon when I discovered the true extent of my family's betrayal. Stephanie is still in prison with 18 months remaining on her sentence. Marcus has rebuilt his financial stability and is dating a kind woman named Lisa, who treats both him and the twins with genuine respect and affection. The twins are now 5 years old enough to understand that mommy made very bad choices that hurt people and that choices have consequences. They visit me regularly at Willowbrook Estate, and they've learned to see the house as a place of safety and joy rather than as something they're entitled to inherit. I'm 70 years old now, and I've never been happier or more at peace with my life. The little rental apartment where I once felt ashamed and diminished seems like a distant memory, replaced by this beautiful home where I wake up each morning grateful for the choices I've made and the boundaries I've established. The Morrison Foundation continues to grow and evolve, and we've recently partnered with the State University to offer scholarships specifically for single mothers pursuing degrees in healthcare and education. Seeing these women walk across graduation stages, knowing that they've built better lives for themselves and their children, gives me more satisfaction than any material possession ever could. Perhaps the most rewarding aspect of this whole experience has been the relationships I've built with other women who understand the courage it takes to demand better treatment from the people who claim to love you. We support each other through the difficult moments and celebrate each other's victories, creating the kind of chosen family that many of us never had growing up. My story isn't unique. Everyday women of all ages are forced to choose between self-respect and family harmony, between financial security and personal dignity, between being loved and being valued. Too many of us have been taught that love requires us to accept mistreatment and that loyalty means enabling other people's worst behavior. But I want every woman who hears this story to know that it's never too late to change those patterns. It's never too late to establish boundaries, protect your assets, and demand the respect you deserve. It's never too late to discover who you really are when you're not constantly making yourself smaller for other people's convenience. The people who truly love you will respect your boundaries and celebrate your success. The people who don't respect your boundaries don't actually love you. They love what you provide for them. Learning the difference between those two things is one of the most important lessons life can teach you, and it's a lesson that's worth learning at any age. My father left me more than money when he died. He left me the example of someone who built something meaningful from nothing, who understood the value of hard work and delayed gratification, and who believed his daughter deserved to live with dignity and independence. It took me 40 years to fully understand his gift, but once I did, everything changed. As I look out over the lake from my beautiful home, surrounded by the life I've built for myself, and the meaningful work I do every day, I'm grateful for every difficult choice that brought me to this place. I'm grateful for Stephanie's cruelty because it forced me to find my own strength. I'm grateful for Marcus's betrayal because it taught me the importance of boundaries. I'm grateful for the years of struggle because they made me appreciate the years of abundance. Most of all, I'm grateful that I'm still here to tell this story, to serve as an example for other women who might be facing similar choices, and to prove that it's never too late to claim the life you deserve. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between self-respect and family harmony? How did you handle people in your life who took your kindness for weakness? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to help other people find it. Don't forget to subscribe to see more stories about finding strength in unexpected places, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve better treatment than they're currently receiving. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and remember, you're never too old to start living for yourself, and it's never too late to demand the respect you've always deserved.